Last time, Caesar climbed Rome's political ladder one bribed election at a time. This episode is different. This episode, Caesar goes to war. 8 years, hundreds of miles of territory Rome had never seen. By the end, he will have conquered what we now call France, Belgium, crossed the Rhine into Germania, landed in Britain, and broken the largest Gallic coalition in history. But first, he has to become consul. 60 BCE. Caesar returns from Spain with military glory, and for the first time in his life, actual money. He wants to be consul, Rome's highest office. To get there, he needs allies. He picks two: Pompey the Great, Rome's most celebrated general, and Crassus, the richest man in the ancient world. The catch? They absolutely despised each other. Caesar got them in a room anyway, brokered a deal, and sealed it by marrying off his only daughter to Pompey. Politics in Rome. Everyone is either your ally, your relative, or your enemy, and the line shifts constantly. Romans called this alliance the three-headed monster. Historians call it the first triumvirate. Either way, it worked. Caesar was elected consul for 59 BCE. His co-consul, planted by the Senate to block him, tried vetoes, religious objections, everything. Caesar ignored all of it and dragged his agenda through anyway. Romans joked the year should be recorded not as Caesar and Bibulus, but as Julius and Caesar, since Caesar was doing both jobs himself. By year's end, Caesar had secured a 5-year military command in Gaul. He was heading north. 58 BCE. Caesar arrives in Gaul, a vast region of Celtic tribes covering modern France, Belgium, and Switzerland, and within weeks, he has a war. The Helvetii, 370,000 people on the move from modern Switzerland, march through Roman territory. Caesar chases them down and defeats them at the Battle of Bibracte. He has been in Gaul for months. Then Gallic leaders bring him another problem. A Germanic king named Ariovistus has crossed the Rhine and is occupying their lands. Caesar confronts him diplomatically. Ariovistus tells Caesar the Rhine is the limit of Roman power. Caesar explains, with considerably more legions, that this is an incorrect assessment. Ariovistus is defeated and driven back across the Rhine. 1 year in, the Senate votes 15 days of public thanksgiving. Caesar keeps going. In 57 BCE, Caesar pushes north into Belgium. The Nervii, a fierce tribe who famously refused to import Roman wine, which they considered corrupting, ambushed his army mid-camp construction at the Battle of the Sabines. The Romans are caught in a nightmare. Helmets off, shields stacked, soldiers turned into laborers when thousands of warriors burst from the trees. Caesar grabs a shield from a soldier, pushes to the front line himself, and calls out his centurions by name. The situation was that bad. The general was in the front row. Reinforcements arrived just in time to turn the tide. And the Nervii were destroyed. By 55 BCE, Caesar was running low on enemies, so he invented 2 new wars, mostly for show. First, he crossed the Rhine into Germania. No Roman general had done this. To do it, his engineers built a full timber bridge across one of Europe's longest rivers in 10 days. He crossed, spent 18 days, burned some villages, then demolished the bridge behind him. Message delivered. Rome goes where it likes. Then he invaded Britain, a place most Romans thought was basically a myth. The first attempt in 55 BCE was, bluntly, a mess. Storms scattered his fleet. British charioteers surprised him. He retreated, having achieved almost nothing, and spun it as a triumph. The Senate voted 20 days of public thanksgiving. He came back in 54 BCE with 5 legions and 800 ships, the largest seaborne invasion in ancient history, a record that would stand until Normandy in 1944. He fought further inland, extracted tribute, declared victory, and sailed back to Gaul. He never returned to Britain. But he had been there, and that was enough. By 52 BCE, Caesar had been at war for 6 years and had declared Gaul pacified so many times the word had lost its meaning. Then something different happened. A young Gallic aristocrat named Vercingetorix united the tribes under a single banner, and he had figured out what nobody else had. The only way to beat Rome was not to fight it, starve it, burn your own crops, hit the supply lines. No pitched battles. It almost worked. Caesar's assault on the Gallic stronghold at Gergovia was repulsed, his first clear defeat of the entire campaign. More tribes defected. Even Caesar's most loyal Gallic allies switched sides. But then Vercingetorix retreated with his army to the hilltop fortress of Alesia in modern Burgundy, intending to hold out while a relief army came to crush Caesar from outside. Caesar didn't storm it. Instead, he built a wall around it, 11 miles of fortifications encircling the entire town. Then, because the relief army was coming, he built a second wall facing outward, another 14 miles. Caesar's 60,000 men sat between 2 armies, 80,000 Gauls inside, a relief force hundreds of thousands strong outside. For weeks, attacks came from both directions simultaneously. The Romans held. At the critical moment, Caesar personally led his cavalry around the outside of the fortifications and hit the relief army from behind. The relief army broke. Vercingetorix watched from his hilltop as his last hope collapsed. The next day, he rode out in his finest armor, on his best horse, circled Caesar's chair, dismounted, removed his weapons, and sat at Caesar's feet without a word. Gaul was conquered. 52 BCE. Caesar is 50 years old, fabulously wealthy, commanding veterans who would follow him off a cliff. He is master of the largest Roman territorial expansion in a generation, and back in Rome, his enemies are waiting. The triumvirate is fractured. Crassus died in a disastrous war against Parthia. Pompey has drifted toward the Senate. Caesar's command is running out, and the moment he becomes a private citizen again, his enemies plan to prosecute him. The question is simple: can Caesar come home? And if so, how? In Part 4, he answers that question by crossing a river he was legally forbidden to cross, with an army he was legally required to disband. And Rome will never be the same again. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for Part 4. We'll see you at the Rubicon.